Chạy đi mọi người ơi, chạy đi, chạy đi. Chạy đi, chạy đi, chạy đi, chạy, chạy.
On the evening of November 6th, 2025, the south-central coast of Vietnam stood on the edge of the storm. Heat-laden air rolled off the South China Sea as Typhoon Kalmaegi carved a deadly path toward land. Near the coastal city of Quy Nhon, winds soared above 95 in Taodahiov, ripping steel roofing into the air and sweeping seawater hundreds of yards inland. Across the dunes and boardwalks, palm trees bent until they broke, and beachfront hotels filled with water as glass imploded under pressure. Farther inland, the Central Highlands awaited the storm's next blowfields, lay ready to flood, and villages nestled at the base of once stable slopes now faced a new hazard. Kalmaegi wasn't just another typhoon. It was a signpost of escalating power in a warming world. And for the people along Vietnam's coast, the gamble to stay or flee had just become urgent.
Chú anh chị ơi, đây là khung cảnh 18 giờ tại cái đoạn đường ngập nước.
The first assault of Typhoon Kalmaegi came without mercy. By early evening, the winds along the coast of Quy Nhon had already reached 100 km/h bending streetlights and uprooting palm trees that lined the boulevard. Fishermen who had ignored evacuation orders watched helplessly as towering waves slammed into seawalls, sending water crashing into hotels and homes. Across Da Nang Quang and Jak Lak, the skies turned the color of ash. Roofs peeled away like tinfoil, and corrugated metal sheets became airborne blades. Residents clung to doors and beams as the air roared like a freight train. In the mountain towns, landslides rumbled down soaked slopes, cutting off highways and trapping families in their homes. Electric grids collapsed one by one. By nightfall, nearly 1 million people were plunged into darkness. Hospitals switched to backup generators while rescue teams braved waist-deep water to reach those stranded. On social media, terrified voices from Quy Nhon described windows bursting inward and entire houses trembling under the storm's pressure. Kalmaegi had arrived not as a passing tempest, but as a force of nature rewriting the landscape of Vietnam's south-central coast. As darkness fell on November 6th, the full force of Typhoon Kalmaegi crashed into Vietnam's heartland. In Quy Nhon, wind gusts exceeding 110 miles per hour tore through the waterfront, hurling fishing boats onto streets and shattering windows in high-rise hotels. Waves taller than a 2-story house surged inland, swallowing beach roads and dragging cars into the sea. Across Da Nang and Quang Ngai, the wind screamed through empty neighborhoods like a jet engine. Power lines sparked in the rain, setting brief flashes of blue light across the skyline. Emergency sirens wailed through the storm as rescue crews battled collapsing bridges and falling trees. In the highlands of Jak Lak, relentless downpours turned slopes into rivers of mud. Landslides buried sections of Highway 14, cutting off villages already plunged into darkness. Families huddled together in candlelight, whispering prayers over the deafening roar of the wind. At 7:45 p.m., the eye of Kalmaegi passed directly over central Vietnam. For 20 short minutes, the wind stopped, and an eerie silence fell. But the calm was only a cruel pause. As the backside of the storm struck, the night erupted again with fury. That night, Vietnam didn't sleep. It endured. By midnight, Typhoon Kalmaegi had carved a trail of devastation across Vietnam's south-central provinces. Quy Nhon's beachfront district lay in ruins, entire hotel facades, ripped open windows shattered, and seawater flooding lobbies once filled with tourists. Cars were piled like dominoes against broken walls, and fishing vessels lay stranded blocks from the shore. In Da Nang, the Han River burst its banks, spilling into the downtown core. Bridges swayed under hurricane-force winds, while ferries and cargo ships were torn from their moorings. Streets that once buzzed with night markets became rivers of brown, debris-filled water. Further inland, Jac Lac and Gia Lai faced their own catastrophe. Hillsides crumbled under relentless rain, sending torrents of mud through farming villages. Thousands of acres of coffee and rice fields vanished beneath the floods. Entire harvests' months of labor were erased in a single night. Hospitals struggled to cope with waves of injured residents, broken bones, deep cuts, hypothermia. Doctors worked under flickering lights as floodwater crept up the walls. Outside emergency responders waded through waist-deep currents, forming human chains to rescue the trapped. From the coast to the mountains, the storm's footprint spanned hundreds of miles. Kalmaegi was no longer just a typhoon. It was a full-scale national disaster. Meteorologists called Typhoon Kalmaegi a perfect storm, a rare fusion of heat, moisture, and atmospheric instability. Born over the western Pacific Ocean, the system intensified rapidly as it drifted toward Vietnam. Sea surface temperatures measured above 86 degrees Celsius, providing the fuel Kalmaegi needed to transform from a tropical storm into a powerful Category 4 typhoon within just 36 hours. As it approached the Vietnamese coast, a high-pressure ridge over the South China Sea funneled warm, moist air directly into the storm's core. Meanwhile, unusually low wind shear allowed Kalmaegi to maintain its tight spiral, concentrating energy instead of dispersing it. This unique combination of conditions created a compact but extremely violent storm-packing winds that could topple trees and tear apart steel roofs. Scientists warn that Kalmaegi is not an anomaly, but part of a growing trend. Warmer oceans driven by climate change are creating storms that intensify faster travel farther inland and dump record-breaking rainfall. In Vietnam, where deforestation and urban expansion weaken natural defenses, such storms are becoming more catastrophic with every passing year. Kalmaegi's wrath is a grim example of how nature's fury is amplified in a warming world.
Này tăng bao về.
As the winds roared and floodwaters rose, Vietnam's emergency response shifted into full-scale operation. Over 200,000 personnel, including soldiers, police, and volunteers, were mobilized from Quy Nhon to Jac Lac. Military trucks carried evacuees through flooded streets, while helicopters hovered above coastal towns, dropping food and medical supplies to isolated areas. In Quang Ngai, rescue boats navigated submerged neighborhoods, pulling families from rooftops where they had spent the night, clinging to life. At a school-turned-shelter in Da Nang, more than 1,500 evacuees sat shoulder to shoulder, listening to battery-powered radios for updates. Volunteers distributed rice, warm meals, and blankets as children cried softly in the background. Hospitals in Gia and Kan Hoa operated under generator power, treating injuries caused by flying debris and collapsed homes. Meanwhile, emergency engineers worked tirelessly to clear landslides on Highway 1A, the country's main north-south artery, restoring access for aid convoys. By dawn, relief centers across central Vietnam were running at capacity. The government declared a national emergency pledging fast-track reconstruction and promising no community would be left behind. But as rescue teams pressed deeper into the hardest-hit areas, one grim reality became clear. This was not just a natural disaster. It was a national test of endurance.
Nước đang lên lại quý vị ơi. Đây, nước đang chảy lên lại đây. Chạy mạnh hơn nữa. Để sợ cho nguy hiểm nhá. Chạy mạnh hơn.
When the winds finally died and the floodwaters began to retreat, the true scale of Typhoon Kalmaegi's devastation came into focus. From Quy Nhon's battered coastline to the mud-choked farms of Jac Lac, the destruction stretched for hundreds of miles. More than 1 million residents were affected, tens of thousands displaced, and critical infrastructure lay in ruins. But amid the wreckage, stories of courage and unity emerged. In Gia Nang, volunteers used small fishing boats to rescue trapped neighbors through waist-deep water. In Gia Lai, farmers shared what little food they had with stranded families. Social media is filled with messages offering shelter supplies and hope. Experts now say, Kalmaegi serves as a warning. Vietnam's coastal cities, once protected by mangroves and forests, are increasingly vulnerable as urbanization and deforestation leave the land exposed. Rising sea levels and warmer oceans are amplifying storms, turning once-in-a-decade disasters into yearly events. The lesson is painfully clear. Resilience must be built before the next storm hits through stronger infrastructure, better planning, and global cooperation in fighting climate change. Nature has spoken, and the cost of inaction is rising with every tide. As dawn broke over Vietnam's scarred coastline, a haunting calm settled where Typhoon Kalmaegi had once raged. Streets once alive with motorbikes and morning chatter now stood silent, buried under mud and debris. In Quy Nhon, the sea glistened under a pale sun, peaceful but heavy with memory. Families sifted through what remained of their homes, finding fragments of photographs, children's toys, and letters that had somehow survived the storm. But amid the ruin, life stirred. Volunteers handed out warm soup. Soldiers rebuilt roofs. Children chased each other through puddles that only hours ago had been rivers. The human spirit, battered but unbroken, began to rise again. Kalmaegi's fury has passed, but its lesson endures. The fight against nature's wrath begins long before the first drop of rain falls. Preparedness, compassion, and resilience are the only true defenses. If this story moved, you help us raise awareness. Like, share, and subscribe, not just for another storm story, but to stand together in understanding, unity, and hope for the next horizon.